So today we're gonna talk about the case of Curtis and Cory Lovelace. Before we get on with the case, please subscribe to my channel and give this video a thumbs up, and also turn on the notification bell below so you can get notified whenever I post a new video. Without any further ado, let's get on with the case. Our case this week starts at Quincy High School in the 80s. Quincy High is located in Quincy, Illinois. And at Quincy High in the 1980s, there was no bigger star than Blue Devils Hall of Famer Curtis Lovelace, both on the field and in the classroom. The University of Illinois gave Lovelace number 54 a scholarship to play football. But he wasn't just any player. Lovelace, a business administration major, was considered one of the top offensive linemen in the Big Ten, a team captain who led the Fighting Illini to the conference championship his senior year. While still in college, Curtis started a long-distance relationship with high school classmate Cory Didrikson, who was studying communications at the University of Iowa. Cory was vibrant, dynamic, a little bit of stubbornness, and she was a pistol, and I loved her for that, said friend Steve Belko. Belko, Beth Dobrinsky, and Brett Schroeder grew up with Cory and Curtis in Quincy. Although the couple didn't date in high school, they actually bumped into each other after and were smitten and instantly fell in love. Friends described them as the golden couple. They were both beautiful, according to societal standards, and it seemed like the star football player was dating the star girl type of relationship. In 1991, Cory and Curtis were married, just 1 year after college graduation. Everyone from their hometown attended their marriage, and it seemed as if everything was going perfectly for these two. Curtis attended law school after graduation and became an assistant state's attorney in their hometown of Quincy. His dreams continued to unfold as they both bought a home together in Quincy. Cory had actually wanted to be a mother and a wife who was involved in her family's life and involved in the town of Quincy that they loved so much. So she kind of wanted to be like a socialite of sort. And in 1983, Cory and Curtis welcomed their first child, a baby girl named Lindsay. After Lindsay came Logan and then Lincoln, and finally their third son, Larson. Cory is an amazing mom. She's head of the PTA. She's involved in the kids' lives, always going to games and recitals. She would play and dance with her kids, just making amazing memories with them. And during this time, in 2005, Curtis actually decided to start his own law firm, and he also became president of the school board. And then he also became a captain in the Illinois National Guard and a part-time professor at Quincy University. So their life together was full and complete and busy, her buzzing the kids around and him following his dreams. And as Cory was taking care of the kids and also processing the decline of her father's health due to cancer, Curtis was doing everything he could, but that meant he was away from home a lot, long hours. So this whole situation began to take a toll on their picture-perfect marriage, and neighbors reported loud and contentious arguments coming from the house, and then it comes out that they both were heavy drinkers, which made the fights worse and the turmoil continued to grow. Cory's family says that Cory might have had an eating disorder also, and that combined with the couple's alcoholism together was definitely not healthy for her. And meanwhile, she's watching her father die, so that's not healthy for her. The weekend before Valentine's Day in 2006, Cory began feeling sick. She was showing flu-like symptoms. But on Monday, the night before Valentine's Day, despite feeling under the weather still, Cory reassembled the kids' Valentine's Day cards for school the next day. And Lindsay, Cory's only daughter, who is now 12 years old, cuddled up with her mom on the couch afterwards and watched the Winter Olympics. So, although Cory's feeling sick, like this night, is pretty normal. But the next morning, on Valentine's Day of 2006, Cory wakes up still feeling sick. Curtis and she decided that he will cancel his morning class that he was supposed to teach and instead take these kids to school for her so she could get some rest that morning. He would do what she normally did, help the kids get ready for school and then get them off. Cory did come downstairs that morning to help, but went back to rest in bed before the family took off. Curtis drove the kids to school, dropped them off, and made his way back to the house. It couldn't have been more than 30 minutes he was gone. When Curtis arrives home, he walks inside and assumes that Cory is sleeping. He sits down in the kitchen and looks over his emails for a while, and then heads upstairs to take a shower. On the way to the bathroom, Curtis passes the couple's bedroom and sees Cory laying down in their bed through the open door. So he's in the hallway, he's looking through their open door that goes into their bedroom, and he sees his wife laying in the bed, and she was laying face up. Curtis pauses as he looks at his sick wife in bed. An uneasy feeling looms as he claims to notice that something was wrong. Curtis steps closer and notices the pale skin, the lack of movement. He walks into the room and tries to wake his wife up. He shakes her, calls her name, and Cory doesn't respond. At this point, Curtis remembers that their 4-year-old son Larson, who was too young for school, had stayed home that morning, like he always does, and he was in the house. He usually stayed with his mom, and he was probably in his bedroom. So Curtis went to check on Larson, scooped him out of his room, and took him to Cory's mom's house that was just like a few houses away. Cory's mom answered the door to her son-in-law and 4-year-old grandson that Valentine's Day morning, only to be handed Larson and told by Curtis that her 38-year-old daughter was dead. Remember, he has not called the police yet. Curtis handed him off and headed back to his own house to be with Cory. At this point, Curtis calls his boss and tells him, "Hey, my wife's dead." He later says that he knew she was dead, and all he was thinking is, she's dead. What do I do now? She's dead, and she needs help. He was more worried about getting his son somewhere safe and kind of handling the situation. So his boss is like on the phone with him, and he goes like, "Okay, well, do you want me to call 911 and like get the paramedics there just in case she could be revived?" And he's like, "Yeah." So his boss calls 911, and Jeff Berry, a detective with Quincy PD, was assigned to the investigation, and the coroner stated that the time of death was very recent, within the past hour. No signs pointed to how it had happened though. There was no signs of struggle. It looked as if she had just died in her sleep not that long ago. But it was the position of her body that alerted everyone. Her arms were up by her chest, kind of in the air, and if you're watching on YouTube, I'll be inserting a picture or more like a drawing of what the position that her body was found. So police asked the husband if the blankets had been like over her chest with her arms bent up out of them, and then when he saw her, had he moved them to like try to check her pulse or anything, and he said no. So how I can explain is these are like her elbows are on the bed, but our forearms are in the air, and one's kind of up higher and one's lower, and her hands are like strained. Like, I'm just gonna insert the picture in the screen. The Lovelace's home was searched, and they collect a styrofoam cup from the bed, and Curtis tells them that it was her cup and it was full of alcohol, even though she was sick. Curtis also says that Cory had been falling a lot lately, falling out of bed, falling up the stairs, and struggling with an eating disorder. Police noticed that Curtis seems upset. His wife is dead, but he's being cooperative. He's answering questions. Cory left behind a family, a husband, and 4 children. After the interviews were over, Curtis drove to school to pick up his kids. Lindsay remembers being told by her dad that day that her mom had died, and after this, the news kind of began to spread through the town. She was so young, she seemed so healthy. Their life seemed so perfect. How could she just die in her sleep? The autopsy shows a small abrasion around Cory's mouth and cut inside her lips. And they also note that Cory had fatty liver disease, which would be from heavy drinking. And at the end of the autopsy, the cause of death was ruled undetermined because nothing else was found. They also are like she was throwing up a lot because of her eating disorder. It was bulimia, which means you make yourself throw up consistently. Then also she has liver problems and she's drinking a lot, and that combination is just not good. So had she died because of that? Had she become unhealthy? And that's kind of what they decide. They close the case. They think that she just shut down. Like they said, we think she just was unhealthy and she died in her sleep, and accidents like this happen all the time. They do. And so they close the case. There is no sign of foul play. Curtis immediately begins taking care of the children or doing his best without his wife. Everyone in Cory's life begins making the adjustments that happen without her. But 6 months after Cory's death, Curtis begins dating a student that had been in his class while Cory was alive. So that class he missed that morning, he began dating a girl that was in that class. He had bumped into her at a nightclub, and they had supposedly exchanged numbers, and then they began dating. And her name's Erica, and she moved in with Curtis and the kids, bringing one kid of her own into the mix. And Lindsay, the daughter, was frustrated and unhappy. She's like 12 or 13 at this point, and Lindsay and Erica do not get along. And at one point, Erica throws all of Lindsay's clothes out into the street and is like, get out of the house. And so Lindsay is like, that's it, I'm going to live with my grandparents. So she moves in with her grandma. It was about 2 years after Erica had moved in that they married. So about 2.5 years after Cory's death, Curtis got remarried to a student. Erica joined Curtis in the National Guard, so they both joined, and they ended up buying a new place in town, finally moving out of the house where Cory had passed. So he had been sleeping in the same room with this new girl. Like, that just seems weird to me, and I think I would have like moved on and laid it to rest. But anyway, all things seemed jolly at first for this new couple, but it didn't take long for the fighting to begin. And it was also explosive fights, unhappy times, and Curtis felt like he made a mistake marrying Erica. He had rebounded with her and rushed into something that was unhealthy for both him and his kids. Erica feels like Curtis was not the same man she had married. So she married this guy and now he's different. So in 2013, after 5 years of marriage, Curtis files for divorce from Erica and they get divorced. And after the divorce, Curtis was once again quick to find love. He reconnected with the girl that he had taken to homecoming back in his glory days in high school, and they began dating. Her name was Kristen. Around 6 months after they had begun dating, they were married. And 20-year-old Lindsay came to the wedding and actually supported it. She felt okay about it. She felt like her brothers deserved a mom. Everyone deserves to be happy in her family, and this would be okay for their family. Christine stepped into the mother role for the boys, taking them to school, cooking for them, and cleaning, and she ended up adopting the boys as her own. It was late 2013, 8 years after Cory's suspicious death, and Adam Gibson with the Quincy Police Department was sifting through old files. He read Cory Lovelace's report, a small file, interviews with the husband, children, and some photos, and that's it. He stopped as he found the pictures of her body. The arms, elbows on the bed, forearms up in the air, frozen. It looked as if she had been in rigor mortis for hours. So he checks the notes. She had only died within the last hour. Adam passed on the photos to other detectives, asking, does anyone else think that this is weird? Detectives were stunned. How had no one questioned this earlier? They didn't figure out why her arms had been standing straight up. They just were kind of like, well, something crazy happened. So everyone now, 8 years later in the police department, is like, what we were doing. Like, this is weird. They take the file back to the original doctor and asked her to review her report. She reviews and says, no, this is correct. Like, this is right. They decide that they want to do another autopsy. But they find out that Cory had been cremated just days after she was found dead that morning. So there was no option for another autopsy. They ask their chief if they can find another pathologist to review the notes and see if they too agree with the original doctor. Detectives also decide to interview anyone who originally knew Cory and Curtis back at the time of death. They're going to reopen this case. Cory's mom, after talking to the new detectives, begins questioning if her daughter's death was really an accident. There was no reason for her to think originally that it wasn't, but it did feel weird and she kind of just kept it closed up all this time. Detectives also questions Lindsay, the daughter, who was now at college, and he asks her about her parents' relationship and that Valentine's Day morning, and Lindsay says that her mother had been up and walking that morning. She had in fact been alive up until they all left for school, which corroborates Curtis's story and also corroborates the ME who showed up and said her body was still warm and she just barely died. Around this time, the new pathologist was reviewing the reports. Like the detectives, she feels like the death of the victim had to have been about 10 to 12 hours before those pictures were taken. So the night before Valentine's Day, not the morning of. Lindsay said that she saw her that morning. So how could that be? But the pathologist suggests the original officer that something was underneath Cory's arms when she died, and that's why they were stuck up, and then was later removed after rigor mortis had set in, explaining why they were stuck in that position. The abrasions around and inside of the mouth suggest suffocation occurred. That's what the new doctor says, and this new pathologist rules the manner of death as homicide. So 2 pathologists, 2 conclusions, 2 detectives, and 2 conclusions. Was Curtis given the benefit of the doubt earlier because he was a pillar of the community? I mean, he was a lawyer. He sat on the board of the school like he was in the National Guard. I mean, it wasn't like he was an easy suspect. So as he was a lawyer, he knew what to say. He knew the cops. He knew how to act in front of them. And where the cops were there was no need to question it. This guy didn't kill his wife. He's a great guy. But there were no defensive wounds, no fragments in the mouth, and no signs of suffocation. If somebody had got on top of her and suffocated her, there would have been bruises, which she has scratched them. She's laid there while someone suffocated her, but the only thing was a little abrasion in the mouth. So it's just confusing. I guess it didn't matter though, because on Wednesday in August 2014, Detective Gibson arrested Curtis Lovelace for his wife's murder. Cory Lovelace back in 2006. All they have is this new pathologist who said no, she died the night before. So they didn't have any other evidence. That's all they have against him. But anyway, Curtis is taken in, and in his interview, he claimed to not even remember if he took the kids to school that day. He's like, that was so long ago. Don't even remember that morning. All I remember is finding her. And personally, I don't think this is that weird because trauma sometimes leaves our minds. We block it out on purpose. The detectives then ask him if he smothered his wife with a pillow. And he says, no, I didn't. They indict him anyways, and Curtis's world is now completely different than it was the day before. The detectives then bring an aged boy from the family, and Larson, the 4-year-old, at the time, tells the interviewers that his mom didn't wake up that morning, and that he had actually gone into her room to wake her up and that he couldn't wake her up. So he just went back downstairs to hang out with his dad. Though he was 4 that morning, and it's been 8 years. But the older 2 boys say no for certain that our mom was alive and walking around that morning. before school. One of them even says, "No, I had a full conversation with her. I remember the last words I said to her." And around the time of Curtis's arrest, we don't have any really details, and we will not speculate out of respect for the family, but Lindsay had actually been cut off from the family and wasn't allowed to talk to her brothers and wasn't talking to Christine, his third wife, or her dad. So he gets arrested and she's not involved with the family at this point. Curtis is charged with murder and pleads not guilty. His trial date is set. So in January of 2016, the trial begins, and Curtis is facing 20 to 60 years in prison. Cameras were not allowed in the courtroom, and the state brings up, he didn't call 911. The dropping off of his kid at his mother-in-law's house and just bluntly telling her, "Your daughter is dead." He never tried CPR. So did Curtis get special treatment from the cops because of who he was? The neighbors testified about the rocky marriages and the fightings. Prosecution also says that Curtis smothered Cory with a pillow the night before, making that injury on her mouth, and then let the pillow sit there overnight. And her arms were resting on top of it, and that morning he removed the pillow because it's evidence, obviously. It would have his DNA on it, and her arm stayed in that position. When Lindsay testifies, she tells jurors she's no longer sure that she saw her mom that morning, despite the fact that she had told cops twice that she had. She claims that she just told the story that she was always given. Like, that was the story that mom was walking around that morning, and so that's what she told police. But she actually doesn't remember anything. She says it was very traumatic for me. I literally don't remember much from that night. And the state also says that there was a 2-day gap between the death of their mom and the interviews with the kids. This kind of does leave room for dad saying over and over again, "I don't know, guys, she was walking around. She even talked to you like a couple days ago." When you're a kid, it's hard to remember, and she had been sick for a while. So did they mix up the days? Like, no, mom was sick, but she came down and made breakfast. So, well, was that Sunday or was that Monday? The only scientific part of this case at trial is the picture of the body being in rigor mortis, and this was determined years after, not at the scene that day, but still, there is no direct tie to Curtis. Even the timeline is off, still it is not an physical evidence tying Curtis to the death. Could you suffocate someone without any other evidence besides a cut on the lip? How was the body warm? 2 police touched her body, and both of them wrote in their notes that her body was still warm. Why do the older kids remember seeing her that day? The oldest recalling the conversation that they had. Was Detective Gibson just eager to close the case? Because he had only been a detective for a week when he was sifting through the cases, so he was promoted. The guy who reopened this case had been promoted a week before and was going through old cases because, it's good to come in and solve a cold case. Also close a case right off the bat. It proves something. Was he just eager to close the case and get one under his belt, and that's why he rushed into this decision? She did have a significant disease in her liver, and she was throwing up a lot, and she was drinking a lot. So is this, or was this, a natural death due to health concerns? The jury had all the same questions that we just talked about, and because of that, it was 6 guilty and 6 not guilty. The judge declares a mistrial. But can Curtis and his family go through another trial? Or should he just plead guilty to second-degree murder, because when a state loses a case, it's embarrassing. So they're going to retry, and they're gonna get that closure. But Curtis and his new wife say, "No, we are going to go to trial. You're not going to say that you did this because you didn't do it." And so they get ready for another trial. But they're completely out of funds because they spent all of their money on their first trial on a good defense team. So this is when the exoneration project hears about the case. They decide to take the case pro bono. So if you're wondering what's the exoneration project, It's a project is when people do research into a case and they get in contact with the defendant and they feel like he's innocent, so he's serving in prison for something that he didn't commit. But Curtis was not in prison, and this is the first case that the exoneration project has done where the person actually hasn't been sentenced yet, but they're going to try to prevent a wrongful sentence. So most of people they help have been sitting in prison and they get them out of prison for wrongful conviction. So they take a pro bono, and all of the friends gathered enough money to get Curtis out of jail on bail. So he had been sitting in jail for 2 years because the trials take a long time, so he's been sitting there, and so he now has a new defense team for this trial, and the new trial was moved to a city about 2 hours away because they said it just everyone in this town knows about this. He was such a pillar of the community, cannot get a fair trial here. This time cameras were allowed, and so in March of 2017, his second trial starts. And Erica, Curtis's second wife, had testified at this trial, but she didn't testify at the first trial. And she states that during their marriage, Curtis was drinking a lot, and he was physically violent towards her. And once he was drunk, and he blurted out that she was writhing underneath me. And Erica was like, "What?" And he was like, "Oh, nothing," and then just brushed it off. So during cross-examination, the defense confronts Erica about her allegations. And the defense actually did this on purpose. Like, what else did he do? Like, what else did he do? What else did he do? Like, what else did he do? His own team asking, because by the time she finished on the stand, she came off extremely exuberant and unbelievable, even crazy. They made her have meltdowns, and just kind of go on like a tangent about him, and then turned around and said she obviously just hates him. Like, she obviously just wants to see him suffer. So it worked for the defense instead of working for the state. And the big blow that came at the second trial was the responding EMT officer testified at the second trial but didn't testify at the first trial. He claims that he had moved Cory's arms when he arrived to check for heartbeats, follow protocol, and this was before those pictures were taken that were in the file that basically started this trial. So this EMT gets up and goes, "Oh, I moved her arms into those positions so I could get to her chest." So then they bring up the detective who reopened this case, and they say, "Did you know that?" And he's like, "No, I didn't. I was not aware of that. He moved the arms." And they were like, "But those pictures, those were the sole evidence and reason that you re-evaluated this case, right?" And he just kind of sits there and he goes, yeah, that's the reason we reopened this case. And now we just figured it out that possibly her arms were in that position because the EMT had moved them before photographs were taken. After a 7-day trial, the jury came back only after 2 hours of deliberating, not guilty. 11 years after Cory's death, and 2.5 years for Curtis's jail time, till he was now convicted of not guilty. So as of 2017, according to reliable sources, Lindsay hadn't talked to her family still, even after the trial. Cory's mom has kind of kept her opinion to herself about whether or not she thinks Curtis did it. And Curtis and Christine moved out of Quincy after he was convicted, not guilty. And they started their own exoneration programs to help people get out of prison who are not guilty. So this case is hard because if he didn't do it, he not only had his wife die unexpectedly, he also had 2.5 years of his life taken away from him. But if he had did it, it's horrible for Cory and her family because there's this huge question mark about how and why she died. And was it murder? Was it just an accident? So it's just it's a hard situation. But that's the case. That's all I have for it. And thank you all for watching. It was a long one. I'll be very happy if you can subscribe to this channel and help me grow. And yeah, let me know about your thoughts in the comment section below. I would love to read them and answer. Thank you again, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye guys.